How do we look at things from a new lens, from a new perspective, from a new way of thinking, and get often fundamentally different answers? Now, I'm going to contradict myself right off the bat, because what I'm going to tell you is that my title says Developing People with A3 Thinking. So the first part, absolutely agree with. We are all about developing people. That's one of the key things that we're trying to accomplish here. But I'm actually going to tell you that there is no such thing as A3 thinking. Now, in reference to my friends, Durwood Sobek and Art Smalley, who wrote a book, A3 Thinking, and John Shook, who wrote a book about A3 thinking, what I really mean to say is that A3 is just a tool. It's lean thinking that we really have to apply. And that lean thinking goes with us every day, and we either develop that thinking and apply it, or we don't. And that's really what we're after. There's no magic in A3. All it is a tool. You pick up that tool and you use it, and you're not going to get a fundamentally different result. What's going to give you a different result is the thinking that you use. So A3 is simply a tool that helps us apply that thinking. That's what it really accomplishes. And so that's what we're really going to be talking about. So a real quick agenda. I must have pushed the wrong button there. There we go. So just a little bit of background about why we even talk about this. Kind of spent a little bit of time going through the tool itself and just some tips and techniques for how you think about using it. Plenty of books out there, so I'm going to assume that some of you have never heard of it. So for the record, how many of you have never heard of A3 thinking? Okay, there you go. And how many of you have been using it for a while? Okay, so, and everyone else is somewhere in between there. So I'm going to make sure, we're not going to go all the way back to square one, but I'll make sure you at least understand kind of where we're coming from. And really spend some time about how to use it for developing people. So how do we use this to get the thinking built in the organization? How do we use it to coach? How do we use it to get the right thinking? And lastly, a bit of call to action, because after all, if we don't act, then what's the point of being here? Only reason for being here, I'll say this now, is you learn for the purpose of action. So if you don't go back next week or later this week and take action on what you've learned this week, then this week was a waste. That's just by definition. So a lot of you have done lean. You know what lean is. Lean value add has to transform something. If you don't take action with what you've learned, the week was a waste. So don't make it a waste. Take action on what you've learned. So a little bit about what A3s are about, and I'll kind of show you some examples of what this really means. First is, where does A3 come from? Well, for a lot of you, you're very familiar with what A3 means. It's just an international standard for a certain paper size. For those of you that are, U.S.-based, we like to do everything differently, so we're kind of pretty much the only ones that don't use that standard. But it's just a size of paper that's about 11 by 17. Now, so what's special about that? Well, what we're really saying is that all those presentations, all those 50 pages of PowerPoint, all those 40-page Word documents, all those things that we spend hours and hours, we want to get it down to one page. So what we're really saying is waste-free report writing. And that's what it's about. All it is report writing. It's about getting it down to one page. Now, there's no magic in the one page. Again, it's about the thinking that we capture in that. And we can't capture everything, but it's standardized and it's simplified. That's the keys. And I'm going to talk about each of those points. The simplified is, let's spend a little less time generating PowerPoint. So I regret to inform you, I'll be using PowerPoint to talk about why we shouldn't use PowerPoint. But we need to cut back on the amount of PowerPoint we should use, and I'll share a little bit of that. But the standardization, it's always the same. We can look at it and we know what we're going to see. That's equally important. It's also really a method for thinking through. So when people say A3 thinking, it's really a method for how we think through a problem. So from beginning to end, from problem definition to solution, how do we really think through a problem? And so that'll be what we spend the last part of the time on, is what is some of that thinking. Now, a couple things that I should say it's not, because there's a lot of misuse, just like any tool that comes out. We misuse it as often as we use it well. So first of all is that there's no one standard A3 format. There's no magic formula. Toyota has many. If you want to use them as a standard, if you want to use yourself for the standard, it doesn't matter, because there's not one format that says, here's what an A3 is. It should look like this. It should always look like that. Anything that doesn't look like this is just plain wrong. That's not true. Now, the danger in this is I actually saw one company spend 6 months arguing, debating, dialoguing, iterating off what their form was going to be. Now, that was 6 months of waste. I can tell you very clearly. So it's not the form. We'll give you a kind of a basic structure to be thinking through. Don't spend too much time on the form. You'll just simply be wasting your time. And ultimately, it's really not about the piece of paper. When somebody says, here's my A3, this is like saying, if somebody shows up and they bring you up to their wall and they have Gantt charts and all sorts of flow charts and says, here's my project. That's not your project. Your project is all the work that people do. That's just, that little chart on the wall is just a manifestation. That's all that is. It's just a representation of what that is. Your A3 report, when you bring an A3 to someone and says, here's my problem. That's not your problem. It's just how you've written down your problem. That's all it is. So it's just a piece of paper. We shouldn't put any more weight into it than that. Now, the reason I say simplified and standardized report writing is that we spend a lot of time in organizations really churning lots of calories and energy around generating reports and reviewing reports and not really being clear about what value we're really trying to get out of that. Now, just as an example of how badly I saw the problem early on is when I was at DT Energy, we had a team of continuous improvement people that we were building. And I asked each one of them to come with a presentation of their problem, the project that they were working on, and kind of review progress and results and how they were doing. And one of them, I can remember her presentation well. There were 27 pages. She was working with one particular department, 27 pages of PowerPoint on the history of that department. So these were photographs and organizational charts and when it got started and how many orders they processed, and 27 PowerPoint pages on the history of the department, and 2 on the actions that they took. Now, that wasn't what we wanted. So it really brings me to the point around standardized. Now, that wasn't really her fault. That was my fault, because we didn't have a standard way to report the projects. So she went off and she generated all sorts of mental calories trying to figure out what should I put together in this PowerPoint presentation. And she was just one person, every single one of them independently put hours and hours. There's no reason we should waste time reinventing the report. Right? We should standardize it so we have a format and we know what we're really working through. So we want to make sure we're not wasting our energy generating reports, reviewing reports, and having those conversations.